Okay, we're now live on Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, etc. Welcome everybody who's joining us here on Zoom today. My name is John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director for CPF. And before the start of the program, we'd like to show some slides with some information about today's program, some reminders about how to hide your chat previews and the closed captioning option. If you would like to let us know about any news items you'd like people to know about, you can always email us at cpf@californiapreservation.org. And then also we have a membership annual appeal this year as well, and auction items, which we'll be talking about momentarily. Today's program will be an hour in length from 10 to 11. We'll have 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end. If you'd like to ask questions, I wanted to encourage everybody to use, if you're in Zoom, to use the Q&A box. If you're in the other platforms, simply comment on the stream and I'll keep an eye on it to see if there are any questions there. This is part of a three-part series. Part 3 is on Thursday. This is part 2 on enlivening historic sites in light. So we look forward to your questions today. We have a 3 groups of panelists today, so a pretty broad group of people from multiple states. So make sure you ask those questions early, because that allows us to make sure that all of the questions are addressed. So you can use the Q&A box at any time during the presentation, and we'll keep an eye on that to address during the Q&A period. I'm going to enable the upvote and comment options on the questions so that you have the ability to click a thumbs up next to the question being asked that you think should be addressed, and then we'll take those questions in the order that they're most requested. We'll start here in about 3 minutes. Welcome everybody. And I'm also going to enable on the chat panel, everybody can chat with each other. So let us know where you're from. We look forward to starting today's program, and we'll see you in about 2 to 3 minutes here. Okay, welcome everybody to today's program. My name is John Haber. I'm the Field Services Director for the California Preservation Foundation. We have a pretty broad and large group of panelists today, so we're going to try to move through them quickly today. Before we get started today, I wanted to introduce our Executive Director, Cindy Heitzman here. And Cindy and I will be briefly talking a little bit about what this program is tied to, which is our annual appeal. And I'm going to pull up while we're discussing this our very special annual awesome auction. So let me get this going here.
Glad to be here with you today. And what we do at every program is ask you to put in the chat where you're from. We'd love to see where everyone's tuning in from today. So please feel free to do that.
Yes, and I have pulled up on the page today our annual awesome auction, which is something we've been doing for 2 years now. This is our third year, I believe. And just a reminder, this series of program is tied to some very unique and special auction items. The ones I'm really excited about for today's program are, first of all, the eggnog party for 6 at historic Peacock Lane in Portland. And we have 3 bidders already in a bidding war over this item. And this would be for the 2023 holiday season. And one of our speakers today, Barbara Bushell, will be the host of this party. So I'm sure she's looking forward to hosting and showing you the neighborhood. The other one is also a very special item that I've always wanted to take advantage of, is a trip to Descanso Gardens. So we have 2 bidders on the Descanso Gardens tickets, 4 daytime tickets to Descanso Gardens. There are dozens of items here that don't really have time right now to go over, but you can always go to californiapreservation.org/bid to make a bid. It's very easy. All you have to do is enter in your name and email address, and the winning bidder will receive the item. There's a lot of tickets, overnight stays, sports events, some terracotta, handcrafted glazed terracotta pots from Gladdy McBean, and some other items, some ephemera and other items. So wanted to thank our very generous donors for making these auction items possible this year. And again, the auction closes this Friday at 8 p.m. Pacific time. So please feel free to bid. Cindy, did you want to talk a little bit about our annual appeal?
I do. Thank you, John. Every year, at the end of the year, we run this program. This is actually our third year, I shouldn't say every year, for the past 3 years. And we found that it's really a great way to end in the calendar year. And it's also tied to our end of year giving appeal. So we ask all of our members and everyone who's enjoyed our programs and watched these free programs that we do now year round to help out CPF by making a donation. You can do it online at californiapreservation.org/give. There's an online form. We try to make it easy for everyone, and know that your support is going to help us continue these programs, which we are offering up at no cost. Help us with our annual conference. It's going to be in person again, in person and online at Fort Mason in San Francisco. And it just helps us with all of our ongoing educational and advocacy programs. So your support is needed. We'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Cindy. So now what I'm going to do is turn it over to our first set of speakers. So our 2 speakers, Barbara and Ernestina, please feel free to turn your cameras and sound on. And I wanted to introduce this very briefly, and then if they'd like, they can introduce themselves. Ernestina works for Salazar Architects, and she was involved in the designation of Peacock Lane in Portland, Oregon. And Barbara is a local advocate and resident of Peacock Lane, and she was very closely involved in making sure this happened. And maybe, I'm sure you'll tell the story about why it happened and all that. So I'm not going to speak anymore. I'll turn it over to you, and I'm looking forward to hearing about Peacock Lane.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm an architect, well, not an architect, sorry. I have an architectural degree from the Central University of Venezuela. And I've been here for almost 20 years and in the Pacific Northwest for about 14 years, working in preservation and in architecture. I wanted to quickly just say a few projects that I worked on, just not only the Peacock Lane. I worked in the Buckingham, the historic district, we try to list that. And then recently with Salazar Architect, we're working on recording the LGBTQ sites in the Portland area. And I don't know, Barbara, should I turn it to you to quickly introduce yourself, and then I could jump into the history, or?
I think my introduction covered it.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I'm gonna quickly share my screen with our presentation about Peacock Lane. And then I got involved in Peacock Lane quickly. Barbara, she will tell the story later on how I got in there. But Peacock Lane, it is a very unique site, as you can see here in the picture. It is located in the southeast Portland, Oregon. This neighborhood is one street development built in the 1920s by builder and developer Richard F. Wassel. It was listed in the National Register in 2017. I was the person who worked in that listing and writing the history and research. It was mainly listed for Criterion A community planning and development due to the excellent and unique, being an example of the planned community of an early automobile suburb design by a single developer. It was also designed in the 1920s using the English cottage and Tudor revival styles as a common architectural theme, as a village-like setting. And it has very unique characteristic as each house is designed and incorporates a garage. Here is a quick view of where it sits. It's a very narrow one street, as is showed here in the map, with parks and sitting nearby. The lower street, they used to have a streetcar coming right in. And it's about 35 resources, 35 buildings, 26 are contributing and 6 were non-contributing sites. It is all the streets seems that keep going on the right on the screen. They don't really go anywhere. This one's here. These are it's pretty much one street or north-south. Some of the other very specific characteristic about this site and this make it unique, not only that the garages the houses were designed in the 1920s, very early on with garages incorporated on it, but also the way that the developer designed it, he built it as a very modern way in how developers would design. Originally during that period, they will pretty much reproduce the same house over and over again. This one he laid out, and the trades were the one that were being house by house being done. So plumbing, foundation, carpentry, all at the same time, which made it very more efficient, very, very modern. Really, no one was doing it at that time that way. Wassel was a very young developer. He actually died at 32 when he was building this site. So he was pretty young. He already had developed many buildings throughout Portland, and many of them are already in the National Register right now. Another very important thing about this site, it is that it was the first one in the city that had a street light. So it's a very unique accomplishment. And here are some of the brochures that they developed to get people to buy into these places. And I will hand it over to Barbara now to speak a bit more about the process.
Thank you. So Peacock Lane is pretty consistent with having just small lots, but there are 2 lots on the lane that are actually double lots. And in 2016, an elderly couple that had lived on the lane for over 50 years needed to be moved to a nursing home and sell. And it was always their intention that the property remain as a single family, but that didn't happen. Unfortunately, a developer got a hold of the property, bought the property, and with the intention to split it and do an infill. And what they intended to do was build pretty much the largest house on the lane. And in order to fit that house onto a very small lot, they had to really shove the house forward towards the sidewalk. And that's problematic for a number of reasons, but relating to the lighting of the lane, every house on the lane up until then had the exact same setback. And really, during our Christmas lighting show, you could stand at one end of the lane and see the decorations all the way to the other because there was no visual impediment. So we, the lane, got involved with working with this developer to try to convince him to please shove it back to the same setback. And also, this developer was well known locally for his modern and contemporary houses, and that just would be such an eyesore. So we also worked with him to make it at least more appropriate architecturally for the lane. And he did. We were successful at that, but in the meantime, we realized, oops, that could happen again on the lane. And so I'm a member of the Architectural Heritage Center here in Portland, and I went to them and asked, well, help me out here. What can we do? We need to get this on the National Register. We need to find a consultant. And so they did. They gave me referrals, and I interviewed 3 different consultants to help with this, but I, at the same time, also went to the City of Portland and also the State Historic Preservation Office, we call it SHPO, and just chatted with them about, well, what do you think our chances are? Everybody knows Peacock Lane, but what do you think our chances are of actually getting on the National Register? And I involved all of the residents on the lane who wanted to participate in these meetings that I held here in my home, so that my neighbors would understand what does that mean, and to kind of eliminate some of their concerns about being on the National Register. And we took a vote. We take a vote on everything, and majority rules. And my neighbors said, yes, let's go forward with it. I got the estimates, but we needed to come up with the money. And because we're just a little middle class group of people, and we needed to come up with the money. So, and Ernestina had said we could save a little bit of money if we, the neighbors, participated in some of the research. So we did. The Architectural Heritage Center, the ACH, they allowed us to use their not-for-profit status so that we could do some fundraising. And we did do a GoFundMe, but we also, to talk about grassroots, the Portland Nursery is just a few blocks away from us, and Portland Nursery is a really premier plant nursery, very well known in the Portland area. And in the fall, they hold, on 2 weekends, they hold an apple tasting event, and they allowed just a small handful of outsiders to set up a table to promote whatever it is they want to promote. And they allowed us to do that, to hold a raffle. So we got a few restaurants that are within walking distance of Peacock Lane to donate Portland Nursery donated 2 live Christmas trees. One of the people that owned a house on the lane was an owner of the Olympia Provisions Company, which is really a gourmet charcuterie. And they donated a couple of fabulous baskets. We got a limousine company to donate one evening of touring the lane in the limo for 6 people. So very, very grassroots. And then also part of what is charming about Peacock Lane is that during the show, we have a very small cocoa booth. It's cocoa and hot cider, and it's very, very popular. And we donate. I mean, we do not charge for that, but we don't mind accepting donations to help cover the cost. It costs money to put on the show every year. And if we actually net any money, we have always chosen ahead of time what charity we will donate some proceeds to. And that particular year, we picked us. We picked Peacock Lane to donate to ourselves to help pay for this, and it worked. We raised the money, and went through the process. Ernestina just was a wizard at her research to prove that we should, in fact, be a National Historic District. And basically a year and a half, pretty much a year and a half after we initially just started the process, yay, we were approved in November of 2017, and we are, in fact, now a National Historic District. The lighting of Peacock Lane, well, nobody really knows for sure when it became kind of the entire lane. We know that in 1929, some houses did decorate just like all over the city, but Ernestina found an article in the newspaper that in 1948, the Junior Chamber of Commerce held a home lighting contest. And that's when the lane said, all right, let's step it up. Let's do this. Let's make this an event that the whole lane participates in. And that started it. It hasn't slowed down since then, except in 1973, during the energy crisis, the lane again took a vote and said, gee, what do you think? Does anybody, want to do this or not? And there were a couple of decorators, but for the most part, not. And then again in 2020, because of COVID, we took a vote and said, no, because we get thousands of people on the lane during the December 15th through the 31st, thousands of people, and it just was not the right thing to do. So in 2020, we did not light up the lane. And we heard via our website and our Facebook page, as you could probably imagine, there were a lot of hurrahs and a lot of good, good for you. And then others were just kind of cranky about it. This is just strictly something that the lane chooses to do. There is an urban myth that there's always been an urban myth. It still exists today, that CC&Rs require it, or you have to sign a contract when you buy on Peacock Lane. It is a myth. There's no requirement. There's a lot of peer pressure because it's all lit up, and so there's just no way you're not going to somehow participate. It is a community event for us. We do get, we know, because of the cocoa booth, which is only the 15th through Christmas Eve, but we know how many cups we go through in the cocoa booth. And so we have extrapolated through the 31st about how many people show up. And yeah, we get about 10,000 people a night, kind of regardless of the weather. They're here in the rain, in the snow, they show up. Peacock Lane has become so synonymous with a family event in Portland, and I must say, we're well aware we're not the biggest, we're definitely not the fanciest, but we are the most fun, and we're so well known that Betty Gimarelli, who has now passed, but she was a local artist, very, very well known for the Portland ornament and the Seattle ornament. And she would take various significant buildings in Portland and Seattle and create beautiful Christmas ornaments. And in 2005, Peacock Lane got their own ornament. So that's pretty significant. And I know of at least 2 songs that have been written about Peacock Lane. I think there's probably more, but I know of at least 2. We're just so well known for being a very important community event. So we're really looking forward to this year and what that means. People are anxious to be out and about now that COVID is not as much as a situation as it was in 2020. And we're happy to entertain questions.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And we'll address any questions that you ask. You're welcome to ask them anytime in the Q&A box here, and we will address those questions at the end of all 3 presentations. So next up, we have Carrie Chastain with Sappos, and she will be talking about the designation of another site in Southern California, Descanso Gardens. So Carrie, feel free to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your work with Descanso here.
Thank you. Good morning, Carrie Chastain with Sappos Environmental. I will give you a brief history of Descanso Gardens and why it is significant, and then I'm going to hand off to Julianne Rook, Executive Director of the Guild, to talk about the Gardens Holiday Light Program. I asked Julianne if she could share the website, so because I don't have slides, so people can have pretty pictures to look at. Descanso Gardens was listed in the National Register of Historic Places at the local level of significance under Criterion A in the areas of agriculture, entertainment, recreation, and conservation for its association with Elias Manchester Bodie's contributions to horticulture in Southern California, the preservation of public green space during the mid-20th century, rise of urbanism, and the preservation of cultural landscapes native to Southern California. The district was also designated the local level of significance under Criterion C in the areas of architecture and landscape architecture as an excellent example of the Hollywood Regency style, an excellent example of Japanese style garden type, and as the work of master architects and landscape architects Eihiro Nunakawa and Kenneth Masao Nishimoto. The 1937 to 1969 period of significance encompasses Bodie's ownership of the property, its conservation of the land to public gardens, and the construction of the Japanese garden. Descanso Gardens is located in La Cañada, Flint Ridge, Los Angeles County. The gardens occupy approximately 149 acres, including 130 acres owned by the County of Los Angeles and 3 smaller areas totaling approximately 11 acres that are included in the boundaries but owned by other parties. Roughly half of Descanso Gardens is undeveloped natural landscape located in the western and southern boundaries of the district. Descanso Gardens is one of 4 botanic gardens and arboretum that are part of the county park system. Elias Manchester Bodie creator of Descanso Gardens, was born in Washington State in 1891 to an impoverished potato farming family. Bodie, who started his life with humble beginnings, was forced to start work at an early age and began supporting his family while in high school and continued throughout his college years. In 1920, Bodie, his wife, Bernice, and their son, Robert, arrived in Los Angeles with only $55. Bodie established his own small book company, which sold textbooks to schools. He was eventually hired to run the newly formed Times Mirror book publishing company, headed by Harry Chandler. Bodie retired as editor and publisher in 1952, and in 1954, the Times Mirror company purchased the publication. Bodie was a progressive thinker throughout his career. He promoted his land-chest theory of self-sustaining land. In 1935, Bodie took out an option to buy land in the Crescenta Valley with this theory in mind. The land consisted of 125 acres of oak and chaparral. The oak forest and oak woodland gardens at Descanso Gardens are what remain from this native oak woodlands and chaparral plant communities. Some oaks on the property are centuries old. In 1937, Bodie commissioned prominent Los Angeles architect James Dolina to design his family's home on the ranch. The mansion was built into a prominent hillside in the far southeast corner of the property with a panoramic view of the San Gabriel Mountains. The stately home was featured in a 1941 edition of Architectural Digest, which gave a pictorial overview of the interior features of the home designed by the most prominent furniture retailer in Los Angeles, the Barker Brothers. In addition to his business interests in publishing, Bodie was an avid amateur horticulturalist with a particular interest in novel and exotic plants of Asian origin being imported to Southern California, particularly camellias, azaleas, and rhododendrons. The early 20th century labor force for gardening was heavily Japanese, and many in turn began nurseries, particularly in the San Gabriel Valley. Of the 2,000 acres of land farmed for flowers in the 1940s, only about half were owned by Japanese American families. In the wake of Executive Order 9066 during World War II, shortly after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, thousands of Japanese Americans were forced into internment camps across the country. Descanso Gardens dramatically multiplied its holdings of camellias with Bodie's purchase of 300,000 plants from Uematsu, a significant portion of his camellia stock, and the Yoshimura's entire nursery. Sorry, I'm getting a spam call. Entire nursery before the families were forcibly removed from the West Coast. Bodie faithfully paid the Yoshimura family installments while they were incarcerated in the Gila River detention camp in Arizona, and took over and helped run the Yoshimura's family's nursery while they were away. In Bodie's hands and under the direction of renowned camellia expert and hybridizer Howard Asper, these thousands of acquired camellia plants soon became part of the largest commercial camellia plantation in America. The camellia forest was specifically mentioned when Descanso Gardens was designated a California Point of Historical Interest in 1968. The camellias are the most significant surviving botanical features from the period that Manchester Bodie and his wife developed Descanso Gardens. By the 1960s, the gardens had approximately 100,000 camellias, comprised of over 800 varieties gathered from Japan, England, the southern United States, and local growers. The post-World War II urbanism and population boom that took place within Southern California in the 1950s was one of the driving forces for the conservation of Descanso Gardens as a botanical garden. Between 1940 and 1950, the population of Los Angeles County almost doubled, centered around single-family tract housing and the social pattern of suburbanization. In order to facilitate the population growth that seemingly exploded overnight, the construction of freeways, utility services, and infrastructure became a priority. Suburban land development within Los Angeles was cheaper and more abundant, and with residents able to stay connected to cities through the automobile, the growing spatial footprint of tract housing and the loss of green space became an issue in the mid-20th century. To expedite gaining control of the property while considering their options, Los Angeles County made a lease purchase offer for the property to halt any housing subdivision development. The county opened Descanso Gardens to the public in 1952 after negotiations with neighbors to satisfy concern over the number of vehicles that would park in the neighborhood. In 1957, a volunteer support group was formed to promote Descanso Gardens and advance the institution as a true botanical garden with a broad educational purpose. For the next 4 decades, the county and the volunteers collaborated to operate the facility in the public interest and to improve its offerings through the additions of special features and garden exhibits. In 1993, the county entered into a comprehensive operating agreement with the nonprofit Descanso Gardens Guild that allowed the volunteer organization to assume full management responsibilities for the garden. Sorry, I'm trying to rush to give Julianne plenty of time. And with that, I'll turn over the presentation to Julianne to discuss the garden's Enchanted Light Show.
Great. Okay, Carrie, that was so great how quickly you went through that history.
Thank you.
Thank you. So as Carrie mentioned, I'm the executive director for Descanso Gardens Guild. We're the nonprofit who is charged with running Descanso Gardens. The property itself is owned by LA County. I probably would not surprise people on this call to learn that as a nonprofit, we always had too tight of a budget, deferred maintenance, not enough dollars to do the things that we want. It is an 80-acre property open to the public, 160 acres in total. So in 2014, 2015, the garden started looking at what other gardens were doing across the country to produce what they did for their holiday lights. We were looking specifically for something that would generate revenue. And we started calling different gardens in Atlanta and Denver and Chicago and wanted to know how much these type of events generated. It's lucrative. And so we decided as an institution that we were going to do some type of light show, but we wanted to do something very different and not have it be about Christmas necessarily, but lots of people see Christmas when they come to our light show for sure. So as an institution, when we started looking for who our partner would be, who our design partner would be, we had a couple of things top of mind. First of all, we wanted to work with somebody who could help us tell our story. What are our collections? What's important to us? I mean, it's very abstract in the lighting when you go there, but what is Descanso about? And because at this time, we were not a national historic site. That happened in 2022, I think, Carrie, or 2021. But we knew we were headed that way. And part of our mission is to protect this place. And we are an accredited museum of living collections. We wanted to make sure we were working with somebody who would take great care of the property, as well as there was a overarching rule that none of our trees could be touched. Nothing could be attached to a tree because our tree are our living collection. It's part of our museum collection. So we met Chris Medvitz, who is a partner at Light Switch, and he was the perfect partner from the get-go. We spent a lot of time walking the site before he even put pen to paper for design. He spent time with our education department. He spent time with the then executive director, and he wanted to understand, what did folks do during the daytime when they came here? Where were they walking? What was important to us? And then he designed the show. But I am going to actually leave most of our time, our combined time, and invite Chris Medvitz to talk, because at the end of the day, I think that maybe the interest is, how do you protect a historic site when doing a show where we have about 130,000 people come through during the course of the show? So I'm going to mute myself but stay on video.
Thanks for the introduction, Julianne. My name is Chris Medvitz. I'm a partner and principal at a design firm called Light Switch. We have been privileged to have had the opportunity to creative direct and design a number of these sort of large scale immersive, we call them immersive light art nature experiences for the holidays at several botanical gardens in the United States. I'm personally the creative director and designer for Enchanted Forest of Light at Descanso Gardens, where we've been doing the show since 2016. I guess we started working on it in 2015. one of the things that I think we pride ourselves in our work is that we really try to create experiences that are very bespoke to the environments and the sites that we're working in. Obviously, for botanical gardens, historic or not, holiday events are a very popular thing to do. But one of the things that, you know, we discovered with working with Descanso at the very beginning was that we wanted to create something that was very unique for them. We started out, as Julianne mentioned, doing a discovery phase where we spent quite a bit of time with the horticulture department, the education department, and the executive management, kind of learning about the history of the site and the history of and the significance, both historically but also horticulturally, of the various environments in the footprint of the area that that they wanted to have the show take place in. We kind of started by establishing some rules in addition to and I think the rules sort of fell into two categories. There were the sort of practical rules, like Julianne said, you know, we can't attach anything to any trees, but there's also things like the impact on the site of what we're doing has to be minimal, right? We need to respect the fact that this is a historic site, this is a living site, it's a living museum, and that we wanted this the experience to have a minimal impact on guests' experience during the day. In addition to that, we also set a set of establish a set of creative rules as well. One of the things we did was determine that the show, even though it takes place in the holidays, would not have any sort of cultural or religious components to it. There is a Japanese garden on the site, so obviously that remains. But other than that, there's nothing that ties to Christmas or Hanukkah or any of the other kind of cultural holidays that take place at the end of the year. And we also wanted to make it fairly free of language. There are a number of interactive experiences in the show, and we kind of determined that those experiences should be simple enough to be engaging without someone needing to read instructions. We helped develop with Descanso's graphic designer a system of wayfinding signage that relies mostly on icons. There's some language in it, obviously, but and this was all basically to address the fact that Southern California is an immensely diverse population, and it just didn't seem to make sense to create an experience that was narrowing its appeal based on cultural holidays or cultural or language elements. But in addition to that, Southern California is a very large market. There's a lot of things competing for the holiday, for people's holiday time. And so we tried to create something that would, that we wanted to create something that was going to, counter program to that, essentially, in contrast to that. But getting back to the historical part of the creativity, the other rule that I think we still adhere to this day was that we didn't want to, or we kind of set out to say we can't treat the site or the garden like a venue. And there's a lot of shows out there that are similar in terms of kind of like light installations and stuff in gardens, but they could kind of apply anywhere. And we wanted to say, certainly there were going to be experiences and things that we would create that could translate and be effective in other places, but we wanted each experience to somehow be tied to the space that it was in, whether it's something very specific or abstract, or even if it's something that just felt interesting and unique in that space. Part of the whole idea here was to show off the environment, and we knew that probably the majority of the guests that are coming to see this, or the audience for the light show, have never been to Descanso Gardens before. And a big part of this is trying to introduce the gardens to them in a way that would hopefully encourage them to come back during the daytime at other times of the year. And you kind of can't do that if you're ignoring the site. So, one of the things that we chose to do on this show was to specifically not have it be a linear narrative based experience, and have it be an abstract experience that guests can kind of free explore. That said, there is a sort of curated route that guests are encouraged to follow, and I feel that if you follow that route, the order of the experiences you go in have a sort of cumulative effect. But certainly, there's nothing in the show that forces you to do that. And again, going back to the language thing, keeping the show abstract and free from character-based narratives or story-based experiences, while it does there is an opportunity obviously there to tell a story about a historic place and to touch on some of the messaging that maybe would be nice for guests to experience. There's also some challenges with how do you execute that and how do you enforce that, and we just chose early on to sort of not lean in that direction. So that's kind of the way we approached the show. I have a few photos that I can share if that makes sense. Let's see here. Can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Okay, so this is one of the early experiences in the show. This is an area that in the show we call flower power, but this was quite literally inspired by these flower beds that during the springtime are literally planted with thousands of tulips. This has been a tradition that, I don't know, Julianne, you'd have to check my history here. I don't know how long this has been something that's been going on, but this is a tradition that people come to see in the springtime. And so we sort of thought that made a lot of sense to create an abstract kind of light art based version of this. Obviously, there's all sorts of things that we can do. These are custom built light fixtures that are programmed to have all sorts of color and pattern, and they are choreographed with sound effects and music and things like that. But this is one of the sort of more obvious connections to the history of the place.
And I would say of all the things that we've created, we have what I call sacred, meaning that our visitors since 2016 have fallen in love and we can't change it. I would say this is one of the two sacred. It will always be there.
Yeah, we sort of are. I think this is a measure of success. Actually, we have the sort of problem that I think some theme parks have, right? It's like if Disneyland doesn't keep adding new rides, people say, where's the new stuff? But if they take out one of the old ones, people will riot. Right? So yeah, so this is one of those things that has become kind of iconically attached to the show. And we try to refresh the programming and stuff a little bit each year so that it is always a little bit new, but we don't do any sort of like radical changes to this. Let's see, there should be, here's another image. This is another area of the garden that's called the Ancient Forest. This area features trees and plants that are, that date back to, not these particular ones, but the species date back to prehistoric times. So this is an area that has been another signature of the show that we really, there isn't in the discovery process and the creative development of this area, we sort of leaned away from creating some sort of specific experience here. I mean, originally we toyed with the idea of there being like almost an educational component of this, where the lighting would change to sort of highlight different species at different prehistoric eras. But then that had to rely on language and how you do that. And, there was sort of a cumulative effect where it was going to be like, we would only illuminate trees that were, that dated back 500 million years. And then we would add a layer of trees and plants that would date back 300 million years or whatever. But in the end, that didn't end up feeling right. And we leaned away from that. And rather than adding something to this space, we decided just to, light the heck out of it. And again, this area doesn't really have a music soundtrack. It has a soundscape of sound effects and things like that are both historical and naturalistic, but also futuristic. And this is a favorite area because of guests. And I think it's funny because as people relate it back to me, you can tell what generation they are depending on whether to them it feels like E.T. or Jurassic Park or Avatar or Stranger Things. But again, this is trying to highlight a historic kind of component here. I mean, I guess I don't know how. I mean, this area, these plants don't date back to that time. They were planted here, but trying to tell that story and trying to relate that to as an experience, as an abstract experience, we decided to just lean into what was already there.
Yeah, this is another one of the sacred exhibits that we cannot take out, but also it's still my favorite after all of these years. And what's really interesting about this exhibit is you can't really photograph all the lighting components and really at least we've had a hard time photographing it. Some of it can't.
A lot of this show is that way, right? It's like a lot of it photographs really well, and that's actually a big part of our design process is to really make sure that that there's a lot of opportunities for guests to engage in the experience via photography. As we all know, everyone's got a pretty good camera in their pocket now, and a lot of people like to engage in stuff that way. We specifically minimize the amount of sort of photo ops that they are, or overt photo ops. There's a few. There's a illuminated sign at the front that people take pictures of their group in front of, and there's a few places where it sort of feels like it's an engineered photo op where it feels obvious that you should take a photo. But really the idea is that the whole show should feel like, there's stuff to be inspired to engage with, through photo and video. That being said, and it's been fun to watch the quality of people's photography over the years improve as the quality of the camera in their pocket improves. But that being said, even with the modern and current generation of phones, the photos don't do it justice. You cannot capture what the immersive experience is like. And so, this is one of those areas that photographs great, but it's completely different being there. Here's a photo of the Japanese garden. Again, we talked about a historical area of the gardens, and this is like sort of, I guess, the one area where there is sort of a cultural component to it, because it's kind of hard to say that it's not a Japanese garden. But in this area, we explored different ideas of how to activate this for the show, and we decided on a prompt from the then executive director, who said it would be great if there was some place in the garden where we could make it feel like winter, because in Southern California, you don't get much of a winter. I mean, it definitely gets cold. It definitely gets cold at Descanso Gardens in the wintertime, but you don't get snow. You don't get that sort of classic kind of winter area experience. So what we did in this area was we decided to limit the color palette of all the lighting to, sort of blues and create kind of an abstract winter landscape. We've often wanted and played with the idea of how to create the illusion of snowfall in this area. And we've never been able to figure out how to make it really work. But this area, again, I mean, the lighting is choreographed. It does undulate, and there is some sort of movement that is tied to a soundscape that's a collection of, sort of almost like meditative sounds and music that sounds very appropriate to the location. But then the one thing that we layered in for the show as an accent is these red lanterns. That there's about 200 of these that are scattered throughout the Japanese garden area. You can see some of them in the background here. And this is interesting because they're all kind of at head height, which means as you're walking through, you don't get a real sense of how many there are. There's a plane of these things essentially that cuts through this area that is all sort of at guest head height. And these lanterns as well are abstract in the sense that they're just simply a globe that glows red. They are not traditional Japanese lanterns, nor are they traditional Chinese lanterns or any other sort of traditional lantern design. It is sort of a modern element in this tea house, which is very traditional, but there are some details in here that sort of give away when it was built, right? Like there's these walls. I don't know if you guys can see my mouse or my cursor here, but there's some walls, partitions in here that in the tea house, and these globe lamps that clearly date to, I guess, probably the 60s when this was built, or maybe their
60s.
early 70s. So we sort of felt like that simple modern shape of the red lanterns kind of tied into what was permanently there, but also as a great color contrast for this. Ironically, this is one of the areas that traditionally is the hardest to photograph because the colors are so saturated and so in contrast that most phone cameras and even it's very hard to photograph this without having to retouch photos after the fact. It really, this is the one area I think that really doesn't that really translates the worst in terms of the live experience, in-person experience versus photography. Oops. This is another photo of an area. There's a field of coastal live oaks that are in the gardens, and in this area we built and installed these raised platform steps around each tree each year, and this is an interactive experience where guests can step up on these platforms, and when they step on the actual illuminated discs, the lights animate and there are sound effects that play. So this area has a very sort of meditative kind of soundscape going on, but then the level of guest engagement on the platforms themselves alter that soundscape with sort of like winter type like chimes. And the same thing is true with the lighting. We really wanted to feature the trees in this area and make this something where guests could engage in lighting in the experience and in the lighting of the trees. The original concept here was like, would it be great if you went up and were able to touch the trees and change their lighting? Well, we ran into some of our rules about the practical rules there, right? It's like we can't create a touch sensor out of a tree if we can't attach anything to the tree. The other issue here is that the root structures of these trees is pretty shallow in about a 6-foot radius around the tree, and even then remains less than a foot or so under the ground. So putting anything in the ground, putting lighting in the ground wasn't going to work either. And so that's why we came up with this idea of these platforms that essentially don't touch the tree, don't penetrate the ground, sit above the ground, include all the lighting and sound and everything that needs to happen. We had to kind of compromise on the idea that you would go and touch the tree to activate it, and instead it's stepping on these illuminated discs on the ground. But that actually increases the amount of engagement because now 3 different people can be engaged in and interactive at each tree at any one time. From an infrastructure standpoint, we still have to bury some cable temporarily to connect power in between these platforms. But because of the size of the platform, the part of the cable that has to go underground is outside of that 6-foot radius. So we're protecting the historical trees by not impeding into their natural needs. The last photo here is this is what's known as the main lawn in the show on the site, and this is an art installation, a sculptural installation by an artist called Hibakozo. It's a husband and wife team based here in Los Angeles that create these large sculptures, and these are temporarily installed. We've engaged with several artists over the years to collaborate with our team at Light Switch to create kind of specific installations at specific areas. And this started out actually as a financial thing. In the first year, we were looking for a really engaging interactive experience, and didn't have the funds to create one ourselves in one of the areas. I mean, we did in several areas, but we needed something that really was it was really engaging, highly engaging, but that existed. And so we ended up reaching out to an artist who had a business model where she had part of her business was creating these interactive art installations that would travel. And so for several years we had her, we would essentially rent an interactive experience from her, and her team would come and help us set it up and all that kind of stuff. And so that led to more of those kind of collaborations with other artists. And usually we engage in usually we'll do like a trial year. We'll do a first year to see if it fits in the show and see what the working relationship with the artists and their team is like. And then in the case of these and a couple other artists, we've ultimately engaged in multi-year contracts with them, so that we can there's a financial advantage to that. There's a logistical advantage to that, and then also so that if these art installations are popular with the audience, which all of them have been, then that's something that we know that we can repeat for several years. And usually we evolve it a little bit. I mean, the whole show kind of evolves, even some of the, like I said earlier, with the tulips, that changes a little bit, but each year, and a lot of it we try to freshen up a little bit so that it's not exactly the same year after year. So that's the photos I have. I guess I'm happy to talk about any other thoughts. I know, Julianne, you and I were talking last night about how, the particular approach that we've taken with this show, and the choices we've made with this show being non-holiday based. There's no Christmas lights in the show, being non-cultural or secular, away from language. I mean, those are just choices that we've made, right? Then, like I said earlier, like the choice to not use a story-based or character-based or narrative experience has its pros and cons. There certainly could be a lot of historical things that could be communicated that we aren't, if we had that. But and there's other shows, like one of the other shows that my firm does is at the old Westbury Gardens in Long Island, New York, and there's a giant historical estate on that site. And so one of the elements that's in that show is a video projection mapping show that plays on the facade of the building. And while it doesn't really get into the history of the site, it does get into the history of and significance of the location, right? Like during the springtime, where the show follows the 4 seasons. And the music is a riff on the Vivaldi's 4 Seasons symphony piece. And like on the springtime section of the show, all the flowers that are depicted are all stuff that grows at the gardens. And then during the summertime, it's like kind of abstract depiction of what summer in Long Island would be. And all this is actually using the historic estate building as a canvas. So I guess what I'm saying is that I think like all range of things are possible here, right? In terms of how you address a historic site in one of these types of immersive experiences, whether you lean heavily into storytelling or lean away from that, what you include, what you don't include. I think for us, what really worked was sort of setting up and establishing what those objectives are at the beginning, and then really spending time constantly every year checking what we're doing against that. And I think with a good creative team, you know, any of those things can be very effective. So.
Yeah, and I need to hop off. I have another meeting, but if I know that there's a Q&A section, and I do think that Chris knows this show inside and out. He would be the right person to answer any
Yeah, I'm happy
questions
to
that you
stick around.
have. So I'm sorry that I have a hard out, but thank you for asking me to participate. I really appreciate it, John. Thank you.
Thank you, Julianne. We're going to go a little over time with questions. We will be recording this Q&A period if you need to leave, but I wanted to be sure some of these questions were addressed first. And I'll start with the first question, and maybe Cindy can take the second. So in the Q&A box, if you check in the Q&A box, you'll see these questions. Looks like a few have been answered by text already. But here's one from somebody about Descanso. How do you provide power for the lights? Was there already power throughout the gardens, or did they add power for the lights? And if so, how did that affect the plant material and the living museum?
There is shockingly inadequate power and almost zero lighting existing on the site at Descanso Gardens. We have to, with the exception of like the building facilities, like the visitor center and the restrooms, we have to basically bring in power distribution infrastructure and lighting fixtures for 100% of the show. There's an immense amount of lighting that we have to put in the show that's designed just to light the pathways, just so that the guests can see where they're walking. That's all been designed very specifically so that it's part of the creative, the overall creative experience. We want it to be very immersive. So we've tried to make all of that lighting, even the utilitarian path lighting, feel like it's part of the space and part of the experience. I mean, we have a number of different creative approaches that we do to do that. In terms of, to answer the question though, in terms of power, the show is powered by 4 sets of generators that are temporarily brought in. 3 of them live outside the guest area, and 1 of them is actually in the guest area, but away from where the guests go during the light show. We use the type of quiet generators that are designed for like film and television sets, so they're not noisy. And they are, I say sets because they're pairs of redundancy. So if one of them fails, it automatically switches power over to the other one. In the first years of the show, we didn't have that in place. And so when power would go, if a generator would fail, a section of the show, up to 30% of it would lose power, and it could take 60 to 90 minutes to get it restored, which created a guest relations problem and ticket refunds and all that kind of stuff if a big chunk of the show is down. So we ended up switching over to a system that the downtime, if one fails, is usually, they say it's 60 to 90 seconds, and in our experience in testing it, it's usually closer to 30 seconds. To that point, we also have in every area, critical path lighting is on either house power or battery power, so that if that does happen for those 30 seconds, pathways aren't completely dark. This, of course, though, requires quite a bit of, or the whole thing requires quite a bit of power distribution infrastructure to be temporarily installed into the gardens. And there's a lot of care that's taken as to the routing of that and how that is put in, so that it doesn't damage any of the collections, any of the plants that are there. There's a lot of areas that are where the ground is actually mulch and doesn't have ground cover and doesn't have plantings on it. And so usually what we've done is designed a system where cabling and stuff routes through those areas. And then most of it is laid in, but then a lot of it is covered in mulch so that visually during the day, you don't see all this infrastructure. In cases where cabling or power crosses guest pathways, any area that it crosses during or in that's on the light show guest pathway, we've installed conduits underneath the pathways so that guests are not walking over ramps. There are a few areas where we still have ramps across guest pathways, but that's only where guests are encountering during the day, so that it's safe. We really try to, we really try to do as much as we can to not do that.
Yeah, thank you. And before we turn it over to the next question, I know one of our speakers has to head out, so I just wanted to give her the opportunity in case she needs to. I think, Ernestina, do you have to leave for a meeting?
I do have a meeting.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your time today.
And I can stay for a little longer. I can hear. I know, Barbara, you answered the questions regarding the district, and we do have local landmarks, but the time that Peacock Lane was designated, there was a different local code, and it didn't have enough kind of a support to control or kind of restrict some of the construction that was going to happen on site. So that's why the National Register was the path to have that. That is changing now with the local code has been changed, but yeah, now there are different regulations. However, when something is designated as National Register, not necessarily is designated as a local landmark yet. So that will be a different step if that is a regulation that they want to go through.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you, Ernestina. Cindy, did you want to take any questions?
Well, yeah, I actually have a follow-up question on the question about Peacock Lane inspiring Laurelhurst. I'm familiar with the area, but Barbara and Ernestina answered that question. But to expand on that, has this inspired other areas within the city of Portland to pursue either local or National Register nomination?
I'll turn that over to Ernestina because I'm only familiar with Peacock Lane and Laurelhurst, because Laurelhurst kind of came in after us and worked along with us to learn the situation. But Ernestina, I know, has worked on others.
Yeah, I was in the Landmarks Commission for a few years. My term just ended this year. And some of the things so I will say that Peacock Lane and Laurelhurst are the last designated districts in the area right now. And mainly, like I said, it's because there went some regulations and new code, and then the city is now trying to kind of reinforce the idea that local landmarks might be the best way to go. Before, like I said, local landmarks didn't have that much regulations, and there were some local local districts that were really almost not regulations over what's happening in there. So now some of those things are changing, and more support to those communities are happening. So I'm expecting that some changes will happen in the few years. Some other areas might rise over as historic district, local or national registered. But during that transition period, which has been the past 3-4 years, I don't think there have been any other local designations.
Thank you. John, why don't you take the next question?
Sorry, I muted myself. It took a while to find the unmute button. So maybe this is something that you might be able to ballpark, Chris, and if you don't feel like answering, that's fine too. But somebody is asking what it would cost to bring a show to the gardens. What kind of budget are we looking at? And maybe a bigger sort of financial picture. It seemed to have helped the Descanso Guild quite a bit in terms of supporting their ongoing programs throughout the year. How does that help the Descanso?
Yeah, I think in like all these shows, and we've been involved in, like I said, we've been involved in a number of them, some of which continue to this day. The three the two that have been the longest running are Illumination at the Morton Arboretum outside of Chicago, and then Enchanted Forest of Light at Descanso Gardens. But we've done a number of other ones. The newest one I mentioned earlier is at Old Westbury Gardens in Long Island. That's only in its second year. And in all of these cases, we really have tried to either our clients, which are the organizations that manage these sites, right? We've always encouraged them to, and in most cases, they've already arrived at this themselves, look at these things as a self-contained, sustainable business model. In other words, they don't use like endowment money or philanthropic donations to fund these things, because that's not repeatable. And so the idea has always been, to create something that could pay for itself. And in terms of what it costs, I mean, that ranges quite a bit. I think of the 3 shows that we have going, the Old Westbury one is the smallest in budget and scale, and Descanso Gardens is the largest in budget and scale. But the one in Chicago is less complicated and less expensive than Descanso Gardens, but covers about the same area. And really the difference in the cost there has to do more with the specifics of the site. There's the budget goes further in Chicago because that site is more open, and kind of the route goes around a lake and you can kind of see more of it. Whereas the Descanso Gardens environments, you really kind of can't see beyond the area you're in because of how wooded the area that the show takes place in it is. So we actually need more production stuff, more stuff, and more costs to create the same level of immersive experience throughout the entire routing. I can't really speak to the specific costs of the show. But like Enchanted Forest of Light is in the multiple millions of dollars in terms of production costs, but it also profits in the multiple millions of dollars. And so for a nonprofit organization like Descanso Garden, and this is true for the Morton Arboretum as well, establishing these shows and getting them properly footed and building a tradition with the audience so that these things can happen year over year has created a reliable, sustainable, additional source of significant revenue for these nonprofits. And in the case of both of those 2 organizations, it has made a significant impact on what they're able to do and how they structure the rest of their business. Old Westbury is only in year 2, so they're experiencing success in terms of selling tickets and people being there, but they're not at the point where it's become something that they can truly rely on, because it just hasn't been going long enough. I mean, that show's conceived in the same way. And these shows have certainly grown over the years. I mean, Enchanted Forest of Light was not the scale that it's at in first year. It has expanded over time. And now we've sort of reached this, I think the sort of maximum size because of the geographic footprint, like to move outside of the area that we're in creates challenges. We're going up a hill now, we've got ADA issues at night and all that kind of stuff. But one of the ways they did expand last year was by adding like an additional show that actually takes place in October that's more Halloween themed. And the model that they're the first of these gardens to do this that we've worked with, but the way that they looked at it was like, how can we maximize our investment here? And so what we ended up doing was saying, okay, well, we're going to take a portion of the Enchanted Forest of Light show footprint, install it earlier, theme it Halloween with a completely separate creative development process as to what that show is and should be, and how to differentiate it, but to appreciate economies of scale by the sense that like all that infrastructure, the generators, the cabling, the lighting equipment stuff, we have to rent it a little longer, but we just put it in the one time, and we can program it to support this completely different themed experience. And then when that show's done, we sort of like untheme it essentially and switch it over to the Enchanted Forest of Light stuff. It's only about half the footprint, so it's not as big of a show, and that was partially intentional to differentiate the two things. They didn't want to poach, they wanted guests to go to both, not pick one or the other. So I think trying to keep those two experiences different, but that was a way of that they were able to sort of look at it and say, okay, we've got our feet planted. How can we continue to increase the amount of revenue we're getting out of this.
And if I could add on to what Chris just said, in addition to Carved and the Enchantment, they, I believe it ends in February, they have an immersive art experience in the mansion itself and the chauffeur's quarters. And it's super fun. So they're exploring other art installations to try to engage with the public.
That's great to hear. I'll be visiting Enchanted in a couple of weeks here myself. I guess my mom has already purchased the tickets, so. But I wanted to thank everybody today. It's just such a treat to hear all of your stories and the story of Peacock Lane, and just the fact that it was able to get on the National Register is such a milestone, and congratulations on that and all the hard work that you did. So with that being said, I'm going to close it out today, but I also, in the chat box, I put in a link to our auction, which, as a reminder, is californiapreservation.org/bid. Also, as Cindy may want me to mention, we also have our annual appeal, which is californiapreservation.org/give. So even if you don't want to purchase an item or get one as a gift for your family, you could always give to CPF and support our ongoing efforts to protect historic places in California. So thank you to our panel today. Today's program has been recorded in full. You'll find it at YouTube, on Facebook, and feel free to email me if you need the link to that. So thanks again, and have a wonderful holiday season and great rest of the week. Bye, everyone.
Thank
And don't
you.
forget Thursday's program.
Yes, I'm sorry. Thursday, we have a program that will look at the Wilshire Boulevard Temple, which is a historic Jewish temple in Los Angeles. And then also we're going to look at the Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. So we would love to have your attendance there. Feel free to check out our website if you'd like to learn more about that program.
And that temple is a stunning Art Deco building. But thank you so much for the invitation to present today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Much. Bye.
Thank you. Happy
Bye.
holidays.
Happy holidays.